Friends, I'm starting with a confession. And the confession is that at some point in this response, I might accidentally quote Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, which has a really interesting emphasis on working for those who we hold close and those we never meet. So it was an interesting experience to meet Fratelli Tutti on the big screen. Although it's not the case that Tom Cruise offers us a solution to Richard's emphasis on the AI, death-defying feats and explosions probably aren't going to be working. I want to talk about the local and the global as well. This arose in questions, but it seemed to me to be already very present in the themes that were being emphasized in our morning conversation as well as in the early afternoon. What Fratelli Tutti does with the local, it seems to me, is emphasize it as a source. It's a source of the good. It's a source of understanding the vision of the good that is possible. It's consequently, therefore, also plural. So there's no single vision of the good that becomes the rigid framework by which we have to do our politics. But the warning in Fratelli Tutti about this is about losing connection with the local. It is the rootlessness that is the risk. And today it seemed to me that many of our respondents, many of our speakers, were responding to that risk by seeking to retrieve sources that were important for meeting this moment. So the emphasis, for example, on memory, on histories that we heard from Richard, but also in the morning from John Cruddas, the retrieval of different traditions that have been part of plural political history. And it's, of course, what Fratelli Tutti itself does, because Fratelli Tutti turns back to a story that could simply be told again, a dry story, we don't hear anything new, but offers the Good Samaritan story in a way that is new, that is fundamentally astonishing, by reminding us of what is possible when we work across difference. Wilhelm Schaap uses the term entangled to speak about the way in which we are surrounded and constituted by stories. We're surrounded by narratives. I learn what kinds of stories are valued by listening to stories, whether those are histories or fictions or Mission Impossible or so on. And of course, that entanglement demonstrates the intersubjectivity that is learned in the local. We learn to be in relationship with each other in this local context. The risk then that Fratelli Tutti is naming when it speaks of rootlessness is a fragility that comes with the weakening of those local identities. A question instead of, as Julian was just saying, of a strong foundation from which we can work across difference, becomes increasingly eroded. And there are other ways in which fragilities were present, I think, in some of the conversations that we were having today. So I was particularly grateful that we had viewpoints in relation to labour and unionisation this morning, because the workplace is one of those sites of fragmentation. There was a recent survey that was being quoted in the Financial Times that Gen Z was the generation that wanted to go back to the office. They were the ones who wanted to be back in the office. They didn't want to work from home anymore, which speaks to the kind of social isolation that generation is experiencing as it's entering the workplace. And there are other, of course, labour fragmentations as well. We can think of gig economies, all these sorts of sites of what management studies is increasingly calling alienation in the workplace. And what's at play in alienation is a feeling of powerlessness, a feeling of meaninglessness, a feeling of normlessness, and an experience of social isolation. So even in these local workplaces, we're seeing the same kind of erasure of social engagement, erasure of the sources of identity within that workplace, within that community, within that locality. And so it's the fragility of the identity that represents the risk. And we heard that language as well from Patrick this morning, that language of narrowed belonging that you drew out of the encyclical. So we already have a picture of the local as meaningful in a rooted way, but meaningful also in the context of global entanglements as well. So there's no way we can talk about the local as if it's simply one homogeneous element within a larger and complex whole. Rather, what we have is an ongoing experience of diversity in the local, in the context of greater diversity in the global. And again, it's this move between the fact of intersubjectivity, the fact of being entangled in the stories, the values, the norms of various cultures, our own and those we encounter. It's also an entanglement with forms of moral infrastructure. So a proximate encounter, to use Suzanne's language from this afternoon, makes present global structures of inequality to us. So when I seek to protect my 8-hour working day, that I supposedly have and don't, it's because someone else is working a 16-hour day. So we can't even speak about rights in this isolated individualist way. It has to be within a larger framework of responsibility. And that came out really clearly, I think, in some of the discussions at the tables and in the plenary sessions. So these types of phenomena, like laws, regulations, these are institutions that continue to mediate relationship. They're not this other thing called politics, but rather the mediation of relationship between persons, those we hold close and those who we never meet. So to have solidarity in an international network means you have to have both. And we've been emphasizing the tension here, but I think what Fratelli Tutti insists on is emphasizing the fruitfulness of that tension, the way in which difference can be profoundly transformative of one's own worldview. So yes, there's erosion of identity, it's fragility, but it's only an erosion of something that is always originally good. This is the key thing. In fact, what we have is the individual person in a network, proximate, but also global, where there is genuine relationship in reality, and what Fratelli Tutti calls us to is to recognize that as a moral calling, a summons. So the logic of Fratelli Tutti is all about what becomes possible through listening, through attention, through rootedness in time and place. We heard that language earlier as well. Through encounter with difference, through encounter with plural histories, with plural value systems, with plural politics. All made possible in the encounter with the individual human person, the real person who's in front of you, and in organizations and networks and systems that mediate relationships between persons. So rather than speaking in terms of these categories of alienation, Fratelli Tutti is asking us to start with the flourishing categories, the categories of we can do it, the category of capability, the category of meaningfulness, where we might seek meaningful work with others, an insistence on norms, including in public discourse, and I wonder if that might be part of the answer to Richard's emphasis on AI too. The possibility of formation of social relationship. And what the management studies element of analysis misses out is what all of this builds to, which is about having not only a stake in the sense of an interest, but an identity that is in the shared project as well as rooted in the local. So if we have a narrative then of the conversation we've had today, we started with the idea of a storyline of gift. It's also a storyline of genuine possibility, the genuine possibility of change, of transformation that starts with the encounter with the other person and builds from there in forms of community that go well beyond those we ever meet.